Okay, question 6. Beehives consist of up to 40,000 honeybees. The majority of these bees are female worker bees. There is only one queen bee. Sounds like Gossip Girl. She's a diploid female, 2n is equal to 32, and she is the bee that lays the eggs for the colony. The queen bee lays two different types of eggs. Type 1. Those eggs that have been fertilized by sperm, and they give rise to females that either become the worker bees or the other queen bees, which we are told are the preponderance of the population. Then we look at type 2, are those eggs that have not been fertilized by sperm, and they give rise to the male drone bees. Going back to here, they're worker bees or other queen bees. Now, given that's the important information, we look here is how many chromosomes are there in the somatic cells of the following bees. So when we look at the idea of the female worker bee, we know, given the information within the vignette, that there is that they are fertilized by sperm. If they're fertilized by sperm, we know that they are diploid because they obviously get half their set of chromosomes or one set of chromosomes from the idea of being their mothers, from the queen bee, and then obviously from their fathers, which would be the male drone bees, and therefore they have 32 chromosomes because they have two sets, diploid. Haploid means they've obviously got half that amount, and so the male drone bees have not been fertilized by sperm, therefore they lack those other 16 chromosomes. Therefore we look at the idea that the female worker bee would simply have 32, and the male drone bee would have half that, which is 16, looking at the difference between diploid and haploid. So next up is looking at the idea of bee. Even though they have come from unfertilized eggs, male drone bees still show genotypic variation. And we want to describe how this occurs. I take note that there are 2 marks here. Now the big thing here, we know genotypic variation arises really from 2 things, which is 1, mutation, which we know gives rise to new alleles. And then we obviously have recombination, or the idea of genetic crossover, which occurs during meiosis, specifically prophase 1. So you could really choose 2 ways to go about this. You could look at mutation, and that new alleles are then derived and then they've obviously passed on to subsequent generations, or we could just look at the idea of crossing over, which is recombination. That's what I'm going to look for. The first point you want to make is that the eggs from the queen bee are still produced by meiosis. The idea being that you've still got these eggs that are laid and they still go through the meiotic cycle. And so therefore during the meiotic cycle, they could actually undergo recombination. So therefore during meiosis, recombination, or the idea of genetic crossover, mixes the alleles of linked genes. So basically you think of the idea of crossing over leading to greater genetic diversity by the sheer weight that they're crossing over, they're exchanging this particular genetic information. And the big thing here is that obviously leads to greater genotypic variation. And so that's one way in which you could look at genotypic variation coming from male drone bees, even though they have unfertilized eggs. I think the really big thing to note about this is that the eggs are still coming from the queen bee, and those eggs are actually, during formation, are formed during the process of meiosis. So therefore, during meiosis, you're still susceptible to recombination and obviously independent assortment, but we'll look at recombination and the idea of them mixing the alleles of linked genes. You could have chosen mutation, in which case you would look at the idea that mutations give rise to new alleles, as I've said a couple of times already, but then they'd obviously pass down from generation to generation, and obviously the male drone bees would inherit that, even if some of them were beneficial and some were not so. And that's the big thing about this particular question and getting that spot on. I think from memory, only 24% of students actually got full marks here, which shows again another differentiating question. And moving into C. Explain an advantage, looking at an advantage that genetic variation brings to a species, and we know this is essentially looking at the idea of natural selection. We know genetic variation is basically the first principle of that, and we know that genetic variation, what does it do? It means that if a population is wiped out, if you have greater genetic diversity, there are individuals that may have a selective advantage due to a particular trait that is more palatable or more conducive to survival and reproduction. And so using that particular fact, it's 1 mark. I'd just say for genetic variation gives some members of the species a greater chance of survival than others, and we know that's due to the selective advantage that certain traits actually give them. Again, this is coming from the examiner's report, and so I'd be really thinking about what genetic variation actually gives these individuals. Genetic diversity being absolutely king, because if there was some sort of cataclysmic event that did occur, we looked in terms of the bottleneck effect, or we looked at terms of the founder effect, whatever it may be, the big thing here is genetic variation is absolutely key.